it's Andy, and today I'm going to be doing my video for my 2022 stats. That sentence got away from me a little bit. So today we're going to look over my stats for 2022, all of my reading stats. I've written down a few that I actually want to go over. I'm not sure if I will add any to it as I'm going, but basically I have sort of details from Copile that I've written down, bits of interest that I want to go over, and this is basically just going to be that, just stats, just a video of stats. This is the first time I've done this, the first time I've really looked at my stats. Got my laptop here with Copile on it, got what I need written down there, so if I'm looking there or there, that's why. So this is the first time I've done a stats video, and it's the first time I've really kept track of my stats for any year, which is great because it's been a really good reading year. So without any further blethering, I'm just going to go and dive straight into my stats. So the first stat, the big one, how many books did I read this year? I read 160 books this year. So it's 160 books in format of short stories, novellas, novels, graphic novels. I am absolutely blown away with the fact that I read 160. Even if you were to take off the graphic novels that I read, it's still a lot of books. And we're not here to judge what format books are in, because graphic novels are just as valid as regular novels, but we're not getting into that, no. So I read 160 books. I also DNF'd 5 books, which are not included in that, so I started 165, DNF'd 5, so I read in completion 160 books. That takes me up to 55,186 pages read, which is, to conceptualise that, I just can't. It's so much to try and sort of fit my brain round. My best month for reading books is October, which was 20 books, and that was probably because of a readathon. I think was that the month that Aurelian was on. But yeah, 20 books in October was my best month. My worst month was December, which was a grand total of 6 books. So yeah, I am pretty disappointed in my reading in December, but December was a hell of a month, so I'm being forgiving to myself, and considering my average was around about 14 books a month, I think 1 month of having 6 books and still to read 160 books is pretty good going, so I'm not too mad about that. Pages wise, again, October and December are my best and worst months, October being 6,953 pages and December being 1,835 pages. So, 1,835 pages, that's nothing to sniff at, I will say. It's still a decent amount of reading. So, how I read these books, 154 of these books I read physically, so I own them physically, so I actually had the book in my hand, and 11 of those were ebooks. I didn't really do audiobooks this year. Audiobooks, if I did listen to them, I also read along at the same time, so I just marked it down as a physical read for my own statistics, and ebooks were 11 of them because I was reading them on Kindle Unlimited. What surprised me this year is my most read genres. Now this is my most read genres based on how I file things, and those are romance and fantasy. Now there are some things, looking at it there, romance is the biggest chunk, it's 43 pages, and that was something that didn't have any other, it was purely romance, there was no other genre connected to it. So the main part of the story was purely romance, so that's not including fantasy romance or magical realism romance, dystopian romance, that does not include anything that was another genre with a heavy romance in it. This is purely romance. It was 43 books. But fantasy, paranormal, dystopia, magical realism and mythology all kind of bundle up together to be probably more than romance. So fantasy as an umbrella term would have been my biggest one, followed by romance, but I broke it up into like mythology and dystopia. So dystopian to me was something that was more sci-fi fantasy dystopian than anything else. Paranormal, again, I debated paranormal with fantasy, depending on how I felt about it. Frankly, it's my scientific method. So, book length average, my most popular sort of bracket, which is a fairly broad bracket if I'm being honest, was books between 250 and 450 pages. So I think on Copile it's like 300 to 500 pages was my average book length, but not on Copile, on Storygraph. And Storygraph doesn't have the same editions I do, so I'm tracking it based on the editions that I own. So, you know, that 300 to 450, 250, 450 is the bracket at which I would read a lot of my books. Now to star ratings. So this is star ratings based on Copile and not based on like vibes. I think I might do both next year. I don't know how I'm going to do that, but this is based on my Copile, and also I do not include any DNFs in star ratings. These are only for books that I have fully completed. So I had 0 1 stars, 1 1.5 star, 0 2 stars, 0 2.5 stars, 6 3 stars, 7 3.5 stars, 4 stars, I had 10, I had 31 4.5 stars, and 105 5-star books. Now, I am going to say that seems a bit ridiculous to have 105 5-star books, 31 4.5 star books, and 10 4-star books. That might seem a bit bananas because it kind of is. I am not reading these books solely objectively. Like, I'm not looking at, is this a great work of fiction? Like, is this objectively a 5-star? Like, this to me is how I felt about these books. Like, I am not looking for much. If you can convince me that these characters are real, if you can make me want to follow the plot, give me that intrigue that makes me want to continue reading, if I enjoy the book, if I walk away from that and I will happily recommend it or pick it up again, I'm happy. Like, so 105 5-stars seems like a lot, but I really enjoyed so many of the books I read this year. And I did reread all of Heartstopper several times, as you will see in my 2022 wrap up, and all 4 of them always got 5 stars, so that adds to it a little bit. I did also have some rereads of my 5 stars, such as Percy Jackson, etc. So yeah, the 5 stars does include some rereads, but I'm not here to sort of convince you that I should be allowed to give something 5 stars. If I think it deserves 5 stars, if I think it deserves 5 stars, I'm going to give it. So there. For releases, I only read 17% of my releases, which were 2022 releases. So 17% of the books I read were released this year or last year. Everything else was pre that, so 23% were 2021 releases. So which means that 60% of what I read was released pre-2021. So that's pretty good going. I've been getting through a lot of my backlist. I am not a new release girly. Like, it's not really my thing. I also only really collect paperbacks where I can. So I tend to get books after they've been out for a while. And then, you know, like everybody, it takes a while to get round to them. But I'm so glad that I've managed to get round to so many backlisted books. And I know, I'm looking at my TBR cart right now, and I know there's got to be so many more on there that are, you know, I mean, they're all paperbacks. Literally, I'm looking at my TBR cart and they're all paperbacks, which means they're all probably pre-2021. Well, so yeah, for rep, I had 54% of the books I read had what I decided was enough LGBT rep to be added to my stats. So, you know, if they're walking down the street and pass a drag queen, that's not enough. You know, I have to have a character who has enough of a presence in the book for it to be considered LGBT. 54% of that, so more than half of what I read, had LGBT rep in it. For disabled rep, there was 47% of the books I read had disabled rep in it. And again, that I sort of decided for myself. So if someone had severe anxiety or depression, I also included it. Mental health issues, I included it. Physical disabilities, obviously I included it, and again, a character had to be a certain level of present in the novel for me to decide whether or not there was disability rep in it. So going by how I got these books, or how I read these books, so 155 of these books were from my owned TBR. So 155 of these books I physically owned, I physically read them from my owned books. One of them must be wrong somewhere because the stats don't match up, but I'm not going back to look for it. So apparently 155 of these books I own, and I read from my shelves, either from my TBR's shelves or from like my read shelves, because every book that I have shelved I have read. The only ones I haven't read are on my TBR cart, and I know you're jealous, I get it. I'm just a fussy reader who doesn't actually have that many books when you come to think about it, because I don't read fantasy, or at least I didn't think I read fantasy a lot. I don't read high fantasy, but we're getting off track. So 155 books came from my own shelves, which is great. I had one arc, which is my first arc I've ever gotten, and that was sent to me by the author to read. I read that on the Kindle, but I wanted to separate it because getting my first arc was such a special thing for me this year. And the rest, so the other 9, were on Kindle Unlimited or Scribd via their ebook service, and that's how I read those. Now, author-wise, so 128 of these books I read for the first time. So that means that only 37 were rereads, which is pretty good going. This year is the year I want to focus on rereads, because my TBR is only like 60 books. So this is the year I want to focus on rereads, whereas last year I wanted to focus on reading books off of my TBR to get it down to a reasonable number, which I still think 60 is a bit much. But you know, you live and you learn. And I discovered 61 new authors this year. So I read 61 new authors, which is, I don't know what to do with that stat, because I'm not somebody who, I mean, I used to just read the same authors over and over again. I've got a lot of series where I've got, you know, several books from the same author. So this is the first time I've kind of looked at something like that. Because yeah, if we're looking at the actual stats, I've got it up here. We've got 61 new authors, 104 that I've read from before. So that isn't indicative of, the read from before isn't indicative of how many authors, because if I've read a whole series, I will mark the first book that I've read as a new author and then the subsequent books as read from before. So I know for a fact that I have read 61 new authors who I hadn't read anything from before, but I didn't necessarily read 104 backlist authors that I've already got books from, because, you know, I read multiple books in a series, so I would always mark each subsequent book as read from before when it comes to the author. This year I decided not to focus on the ethnicity or the gender of the author, and that is because I got most of the way through the year and realised that I had not been tracking it properly. Other than a select few authors, I know nothing about authors. I don't know what they look like, I don't know where they're from, I don't know pretty much anything about them. You know, now that I'm getting more into the sort of author sphere, like, I know who John Green is. I know he's a white American guy. I know that Patricia Cornwell is a white woman, again, American. I know that Vicky Schwab is a non-binary person living in Edinburgh, but is, I think, American. See, I don't even know that. I just know they live in America. I know that Rick Riordan is a white man. Like, other than that, I don't know. I didn't even know that some of my favourite authors had pen names. Like, that's how much I'm unplugged from the authors. So that is something I want to try and make an effort next year to kind of be more aware of what I'm reading. Not because I'm going to stop reading popular authors, or I'm only going to read authors who don't have, you know, a big backlist or a big following or anything like that. I'm going to read what I'm going to read. I'm going to read what I enjoy, and that's not going to stop. Basically, I've not been tracking my POC authors or my author gender, because I do not look into that when I am picking up a book. I only really pick up a book if I'm interested in it, and then sometimes I will find out things about authors. So there are authors that I will not read from because of how I feel about that author, and it just sours the work for me. I just can't separate things like that. For me, it's just something I can't do. Okay, so that is my rambly stats about my 2022 reading year. I cannot believe I read 160 books this year, and I cannot believe how much I read within genres. I mean, Cropile has a genre split as well, and I did not realise how much romance, well, I mean, I did realise how much romance I was reading because I was reading a lot of romance. But fantasy, I've always said I don't read fantasy. I've just said I don't read fantasy, and yet 23 of the books I read this year, I had enough fantasy to call them pure fantasy. And you can look at the books I've read this year and probably see that they're not actually like fantasy books. It's so interesting to look at these stats. I've never done it before, which is why I'm a bit rambling and why I'm a bit confused, because I've never looked at my stats before and actually thought about them. And I think it is something I'm definitely going to do a lot more going into 2023. I'd like to read a lot more consciously this year, because I have such a small TBR. I would like to read a lot more variety this year when it comes to new authors, because before I was a bit scared of picking up authors that I didn't know, and now thanks to my friends and other people I've met through BookTube, through Discord, I am feeling a bit braver about picking up books that I'm not sure of. Actually, every book that I've given, like my highest rated books of the year, so things like Her Majesty's Royal Coven, Babel, those are the two that I can see from here. The Dark Vault by V. Schwab, like, these are books that I would never have picked up on my own, and I ended up loving. Heartstopper. I said that I would not like Heartstopper. I said that I do not like graphic novels, and I would not read graphic novels, and I wasn't going to pick up Heartstopper, and I wasn't going to get in on the hype, and it wasn't going to be for me. There was no way I was going to like it. Now I've read it several times through the year. I've watched the TV show several times. I have a Heartstopper tattoo. I love it so much. So basically what I'm saying is, like, if you think I'm going to like a book, please tell me, because I need to give more books a chance at this rate, because apparently I'm not choosing the right books for myself. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching this video. I'm so sorry that this is an absolute mess of a video. I thought I was going to have more of a handle on my mouth, but apparently I do not. And I'm not sure how much of the rambling is going to get on to the video. So yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.